Hello, welcome to the Story Maps Screenwriting Podcast. I'm Dan Calvisi, author of the Story Maps series of screenwriting books, and you can find me at act4screenplays.com. Once again, we're going to be talking about a comic book movie, so I'm joined by site expert Steve Lam of bamsmackpow.com. Hey Steve, how's it going?
Hey Dan, it's great to be here to talk about the return of our favorite space misfits.
Yeah, that's right. We're going to be talking about Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, which we both enjoyed. I really liked it. I think maybe you liked it a little bit more than me, but it's definitely a worthy entry into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. We were talking about where we rank it in the MCU. For me, I think I rank it probably 6, 7, 8 in terms of, my likes. Huge Avengers fan, Avengers, Age of Ultron, Captain America Civil War. I like the first Iron Man. I'm also partial to Iron Man 2. I like that Guardians of the Galaxy is the most comedic of all the franchises, so I will say that. How about you, Steve? Where do you rank it?
Well, it was really hard to rank this. I mean, every time the MCU comes out with something new, I would be like, oh, this is my favorite one. They got to re-rank it again, re-rank it again. I mean, they just have a really good knack of telling stories, right, and creating these memorable characters. My current ranking is: first one is Avengers, second one is Captain America Civil War, third one is Captain America Winter Soldier, fourth is Iron Man, and the fifth right now is Guardians of the Galaxy. And I'd say Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 ties with its predecessor, the first one. I think they both have great storytelling, like you said. Comedy was on point. It was hilarious. I would say I ranked it as number 5, which is the same as the first one, because they're such different movies. It's very hard to say which one is better than the other. So, but they're just great, great memorable characters. It's in a continuation of their story. It's just such a different movie. It's almost like comparing like Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back. It's just different ways of telling the story. The first one was a very large story.
Which is that's how a sequel should be. It should be a different kind of type of movie, but with the same energy and, of course, characters that we love. So I think they really pulled that off.
Right. You got to add something to it, making a sequel versus just saying, oh, this is Guardians of the Galaxy 2. So it's just a different adventure just with this cast. So they really developed on the first one. And I like how the first one was very large. It was basically about saving Xandar and in turn the whole galaxy, because they had to retrieve this Infinity Stone, which is a huge, daunting, large task. And then maybe, not to say the scenes weren't emotional, they weren't as big on emotion as the second one. Again, not saying that they didn't have emotion. It's just in comparison to the second one, wasn't as large with emotions and feelings. The second one,
probably the second one was more character driven, wouldn't you say? There wasn't that huge, like the MacGuffin basically was Rocket Raccoon steals some batteries,
Yeah, the second one
was a pretty small event. There wasn't as big as an Infinity Stone, but it worked because they've established the characters and we know them and love them. So
right, yeah. Like the second one was just it was a much smaller goal. It wasn't like state. I mean, there was, but it just didn't seem like it was in the foreground. It was mostly in the background. Like, yes, Ego was gonna, implement his plan or execute on it, and you go, okay, well, the consequences are every single planet's gonna explode. But then again, that wasn't in the foreground. That was more in the background. And the bigger things, like bluntly in your face, was like you said, like Rocket's thing about stealing batteries. But you knew everything was just about they went big on family. They went bigger on a smaller story.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's hold all these topics because what we're going to do is we're going to do 10 screenwriting lessons from Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. So if you're a fledgling or an experienced screenwriter, these are things we're saying, these are takeaways that you can use in your own writing. So why don't we jump in? Number 1 for me is hide exposition. I think Guardians did this good and bad. You definitely want to try to not have it only be in dialogue. So because it was a sequel, I think they had to do a certain amount of explaining of what happened in the previous film and some of the dynamics, some of the motivations. But I think they maybe put a little bit too much of that in dialogue. There was too much of that explainy dialogue. And they could have used more visual techniques to show exposition. So
Yeah,
That's
I
my number
sort of
one.
okay. So I sort of kind of agree on that. I think in any other screenplay or movie or story, that would have been the case, that it wasn't visual enough. But I think the case with Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 and even the first one is that these characters have become so interesting that when they're speaking, I was on the edge of my seat thinking, what sort of crazy thing is going to come out of this guy's mouth, or what are they going to say, or what are they going to, is there a joke, is there a punchline to this? And I was waiting for something wacky to happen. So it didn't bother me as much. But since you mentioned it, if you want to dissect it more, then yeah, I mean, for a first time screenwriter, you should focus on being visual as much as you can, because it is a visual medium.
Mhm. Yeah, and a good example of that would be when Ego is explaining his history with Peter's mother, and we see that visual kind of visual scape of their history. For me, I thought it looked a little bit too much like Barbie and Ken dolls. It was a little too plastic looking, but it got the job done, and you can follow it easily. You didn't even need the dialogue really to follow it. So that was a good visual way of giving backstory. Okay, so how about you? What's your first one?
My first one, or you mean my second screenwriting?
Number two in the lesson, but your first lesson.
Okay, my first lesson. I'd say selfishness is everything. Guardians of the Galaxy, these characters are just sort of this franchise within the larger MCU franchise, has probably the most selfish, hilarious characters. Like, everybody is doing something. I mean, they're worse than I think the Avengers when they first started. I think these guys are just, I mean, of course, they're thieves and pirates, right, and assassins. The reason this works so well is that it's very blatant that they're selfish, self-serving, which is exactly screenwriting 101. Like, never create characters that are altruistic. It's just not realistic. Everybody has their own goals. Everybody has their own selfish reasons for being here or doing something. So if you do that, then you introduce a couple more characters also with selfish goals. And then there's this sort of push and pull conflict. Like, I want to do it my way, I want to do it my way. So it makes things a lot more interesting. And then in a way, it helps your characters push the story forward. So I think Guardians of the Galaxy, this franchise, is a lesson on selfish characters, which is something every screenwriter should actually concentrate on. Even cases like if you have some characters as altruistic as Captain America. I mean, it's subtle though, but even he has conflict. But Guardians of the Galaxy, it's really in your face. So if there's anything to take away from Guardians of the Galaxy, is that, yeah, selfish characters really do work.
Yeah, it definitely adds some color, and it just goes towards that very basic concept of dramatic writing, which is know what your character wants. So
Yep.
if we know that they have these selfish needs, then we're going to accept their character more. They're going to be more interesting. It's another shade to them. And if you're writing it, it really helps you write their dialogue and their actions, knowing where they're coming from by knowing their dramatic characteristics, which we'll talk more about in a bit. So number 3 for me was earn your violence. So if you're going to have a really violent scene, a really intense scene, make sure that it's set up correctly. Now, I've been looking on YouTube about people reviewing the film, and a lot of people, this is their favorite scene of the whole movie. For me, although I thought it was cool, it was probably my least favorite, and that's when Yondu has his death spear arrow and he's taking out every single guy on the ship as they're escaping. I thought it was too violent. I thought it was too intense, too dark. It was actually kind of disturbing to me. Whereas I think they wanted you to laugh because it was like the slow-mo and the music, and I think it was supposed to be funny. But I thought about it, and the reason why I think was his motivation, or for us, the reason why we wanted to see all these guys die, was not only that they were disloyal to him, but it was mostly because they were picking on Baby Groot, which also affected me. I hated to see Baby Groot being kicked around like that. But the problem was there was too much time between the Baby Groot scene and the Death Spear scene. In fact, there was a sequence that I thought was too long, which was when Baby Groot keeps going back and getting the objects until he finally gets the prototype Mohawk device. So I think maybe if they shortened that time period, if they edited the time between those two scenes, I think it may have been a little bit more motivating. What do you think, Steve?
I think in cases like these, it's almost like the scenes, they probably showed it to a test audience. And I think the reaction has been more Baby Groot, right? I mean, people have said, like, the joke is that Baby Groot is probably going to be the most wanted toy this Christmas, right? Everybody wants a Baby Groot. And I think that for me, actually personally for me, I really didn't see that as a problem just because of the same things you cited, was that the picking on Baby Groot scene and also the Ravagers killing Yondu's friends was enough. They deposited enough in the bank of empathy and sympathy that I bought into. All right, these guys kind of got what they deserve. And I think I understand where you're coming from with they try to make them scenes of murder with levity, so it makes it even more morbid because he's like all like singing, walking in slow-mo.
Do you think, because I think you saw the double feature, right? So having just seen Guardians of the Galaxy Part 1, do you think you had more bias against the Ravagers, that you were okay with seeing them die? Because I basically forgot about them being in the first film.
Again, if you're saying you're okay with seeing all the Ravagers die, I guess you're clustering on Yondu also, because he wasn't really that bad. But it's funny you did bring up the double feature. Is that watching that you actually see, because they make a lot of references to the first movie, subtle references, things like Yondu having a soft spot for Peter. So he wasn't all bad in the first movie either. And this one they keep mentioning that. So you're like, yeah, I just saw the first movie. He did have a soft spot for Peter. And his own Ravagers keep mentioning that. So I don't think the first movie really affected me in accepting or not accepting the Ravager killing scene. But I think what really made or break it was actually the fact of Baby Groot getting picked on and then seeing his friends getting killed who are loyal to him. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And then I think what really sort of pinned it, I think, was, I believe his name is probably Kraglin, right? James Gunn's brother. That character, one of the Ravagers. I think
I'm not sure what his character name is, but
it might be Kraglin.
He looks like James Gunn with that teeth.
So. Yeah, we'll double check it. But when he said that thing, like he goes, I was, I was in on the mutiny, but they started killing my friends, right? So that's sort of like, it's like, okay, even though these guys are bad, it's not like they don't have family. They still have people they care about, and of course that's why Yondu acts the way he does towards Peter. And we'll talk about that later also. But yeah, if you really nitpick at it, that's true. And again, Guardians of the Galaxy, the reason why we're making screenwriting lessons out of this is that it straddles the line with a lot of these things, and it makes that debatable. And it's very interesting that James Gunn can pull it off with a majority of people accepting it, that okay, he just killed these people because they were they're just kind of bad. Mm-hmm. But for people who are more critical, like you would be like, that's kind of morbid. It's like, should the audience be with them on this? Like, he's just murdering these people randomly, and it's basically mass murder, not even just a few people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, Gunn is so good at mixing tones, so I think he pulls it off to a certain degree. I am being picky, most people, it seems like, really like that. But okay, so how about the next one? We are on number 4.
Okay. Using drastically contrasting emotions. So if you notice in a lot of the scenes, James Gunn, like you said, he mixes tone really well. James Gunn creates these situations that are just uber awkward, hilarious. It's like, where do you even come, especially with Drax in this movie. And then he suddenly throws
silly
exactly.
fun too.
Really silly fun, really out there scenes that people are just like, what? And they start laughing just like because of the, just the concept of, what these guys, the thinking patterns of these people. And then he throws in these very sad, poignant moments subtly. So there's a sort of a hot and cold, right? And what I wrote in one of my reviews is that he gives you a spoonful of sugar and then he suddenly has you suck on a lemon wedge. And then you're like, oh my God, it's like what a contrast, right? Good. What a contrast, right? So what he does is, even though some of these on their own would be sort of mundane emotions because they're clashing against each other, he's heightened them that much more in the story. So I think he did a really good job at doing that. And I think there's a lesson to be learned, is that if you guys have a problem with, or screenwriters have a problem with increasing the comedy of a situation or increasing the emotion of it, try to find some sort of contrast in your scene and see how that would work. Because suddenly bringing it down might just be exactly what you need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and probably one of the big keys is understanding your characters and then having the audience or the reader already like them and sympathize with them.
Right.
So like Drax, for example, he's always saying these horribly blunt things, but we just like him. He's a lovable teddy bear of a guy.
Yeah.
So he can say these horrible things like he did to Mantis, constantly calling her ugly and stuff. So But that's because we're already on board with these characters,
Right.
you know, because they won us over with enough sympathy and empathy from the writer.
Yep.
So, okay, so the next one for me, which is a good segue, is sympathy for villains. Give us some sympathy for your villain. They can't be totally evil, okay? Or maybe have them be a little bit funny like the Sovereigns are. Here's a tip. I would say if you can make their sympathetic trait relate to theme, okay? You should know your theme, of course, your controlling theme as you write. It's going to help you generate scenes. It's going to help control your dialogue and your character arcs. There was a scene, Nebula and, well, just in general, Nebula and Ego were both related by the theme of family, because Nebula is Gamora's sister and Ego is Peter's father. So that wasn't a coincidence, obviously. That was James Gunn writing these characters to that theme. You know, he was writing these characters to that theme. The Sovereigns may be genetically perfect, but our heroes are really flawed. So you have this perfect family and dysfunctional family. And like you said, there's a lot of contrasted conflict there, differing tones, and he's really good at that. So have your villains relate to theme and have them be a little bit sympathetic. Some reason for us to like them.
Right. I agree. I completely agree with that, because sometimes if you make your villain way too quote unquote evil, he becomes very cardboard and almost laughable. I mean, one example would be, you know, I'll bring this up, is Batman versus Superman, Lex Luthor. There's nothing really sympathetic about that character. It was almost cartoonish the way he was evil. It's like, what's your motivation? You know, things, you know, why are you doing this? As opposed to Lex Luthor that was in Smallville. If you've ever seen that series, he was a very sympathetic character. In the beginning, he was actually Clark's best friend.
Or just straight up charisma as well.
Charisma,
like, you know, Lex Luthor in Batman versus Superman didn't really have any charisma. We didn't really want to watch him.
Right.
There was nothing exciting about him. Whereas like Gene Hackman as Lex Luthor had a ton of charisma, hilarious. You know, we would have watched him do anything. So you know, charisma as well and sympathy.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So what's the next one? Number 6.
Number 6. This is where I was very impressed with what James Gunn did. So instead of one big goal, have small multiple mini goals, right? In the first Guardians of the Galaxy, they had one big goal, is basically keep Ronan from getting the Infinity Stone and destroying Xandar. So whatever they did was sort of circled that goal. Like everything that they did revolved around
supported that goal.
Supported that Infinity Stone goal. This one, I was trying to find out, well, what's the main goal? Well, like you mentioned, is initially it was Rocket stealing those batteries, and their first goal was just get away from the Sovereigns because they're coming after to kill them. So then they crash. But then you found out, like, oh, he runs into Ego. Now his goal is trying to find out more about why Ego left Earth. You know, why has he been searching for him for all these years? And then you had the other goal of Nebula trying to kill Gamora, Gamora trying to survive Nebula's attacks. And you had the other goals with the Ravagers of Yondu and Rocket and Groot being captured. And then, you know, will Yondu ever get his team back? Will he get his ship back? So they started looking at it, so I go, well, it's kind of like Empire Strikes Back. It's all these separate small little goals that people separated. You know, they separated in trying to accomplish. And so I found out it's okay.
Even the opening scene really stands apart from everything. They could have come right out of the gate and had the opening scene be Rocket stealing the batteries and then go from there. But they had this, you know, totally different, fun, crazy action scene. And of course, it highlighted Groot because everybody wants to see baby Groot. So cute. Yep. But yeah, that was its own little goal for whatever that was, 10, 12 minutes. And then they went to a new one. So
yeah. And the thing is that the lesson here to learn is that, okay, it's like, it doesn't give you a free pass and saying, all right, cool, my screenplay doesn't need a goal. But whatever your goals are, they should also try to get your characters to converge. Because if you notice, Nebula's goal of killing Gamora leads her onto Ego's planet. And then that goal also carries the theme of, you know, that's a family thing. She had this grudge against Gamora for doing what she did when they were children. Even Peter trying to prevent Ego from exacting his plan. All that ties in, and they sort of converge. And same with Yondu. Yondu trying to get away from the Ravagers. He finally meets up on Ego's planet too. So all these goals should actually have your characters combined. It's not, the lesson isn't just saying like, oh, you don't need a big goal. But again, this is one of those things where someone as skillful as James Gunn can pull off. And, you know, we've seen that already too with J.J. Abrams with Star Trek Into Darkness. Like, he talks about boxes, right? You open up different boxes as surprises and things like that, and seeing how each scene pushes things forward.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, you always want to be advancing the story. There's nothing worse than the reader not knowing where the story's at or where it's going, you know?
Yep.
Your job as a screenwriter is to surprise the reader, to establish expectations, and then subvert those expectations.
Right.
So you can figure out that you were wrong about what direction it was going, but you need to think that you know what direction it's going at the time before the rug gets pulled out from under you.
Right.
Which is interesting segue to my number 7, which is let the MacGuffin go. Okay. Now, it still worked and it was fun, but the whole idea of the Sovereigns chasing them for the batteries went on a little bit long. You got to admit that. I mean, they held that until the last battle. The Sovereigns show up for the second or third time deploying their fleet. They've gone through the 70 time warps or whatever it is, 700 time warps.
700, yeah.
So they did all that just to get a handful of their batteries. Although he does justify it, it was more about the disrespect that the Guardians showed for them, kind of the, you know, saving face kind of thing, than it was about the batteries, which is totally silly and over the top. But I guess he earned that. But it just seemed a little bit far, you know, a little bit convenient that in the end, this entire fleet shows up to make it even tougher, the final battle. And then I was like, but why are they showing up? Oh, they still want those batteries, really?
Yeah.
You know, so in your script, you know, if your script, you're probably not going to have a $200 million budget and have established a franchise and have the Disney marketing team behind you. So you want that reader to still believe in what the MacGuffin is, the thing that's launched the story, the through line, you know, the catalyst. Does it still have gas in the tank?
Right.
So that's my lesson.
Right. Yeah, I didn't have as much problem with that. And also because, like you said, like they mentioned it beforehand. Like, I think they mentioned it enough that I accepted it, because Peter was the one that first mentioned the rocket right after they killed the large, you know, space octopus in the beginning of the movie, that, you know, be very careful of what you say. Don't, you know, these people take it, like, you could get executed for insulting them.
Well, here's how I think it would have been better if they called it out in a joke. Like Rocket or somebody would have been like, Jesus, these people really hold a grudge, you know?
Right.
I think if they called it out, it would have made it better, you know, for the audience and for picky guys like me.
Right.
Like an example of that, a silly example would be from that 80s comedy Better Off Dead. If you remember, there was the paper boy who was coming after, was it his $4 or his $2?
I think so, yeah. I vaguely remember that, but
yeah, he's like, give me my $2, my $2.
Wow. I want my $2.
And it became a runner, you know, a running joke. So I think they needed the give me my $2 type of, you know, money line. So
right. Okay. Yeah, I agree with you.
So number 8, what do you got?
So number 8 is that every scene should have an emotional through line. If you look at all their action scenes, there's some emotion behind it. With Nebula coming after Gamora, you're like, okay, that's a cool action scene. We see Gamora pick up this giant space cannon or space, you know, gun and start firing it at Nebula. But at the very end, even with all those cool fight scenes, you find out exactly why Nebula was coming after Gamora. The whole point was that she was trying to, in a way, kill her feelings of being abandoned and loneliness. It wasn't really about killing Gamora, because it just revealed that when they were children, Gamora would always best her in battle. And so Nebula said, I didn't care about that. She goes, I didn't care about the battle. All I wanted was a sister, and you didn't see that. You just saw me as an adversary, or as someone to use me as someone to make yourself impressive towards our, you know, our father is really not even our father. He abducted us from our own families. So I think that was really well done with the emotional through line. If you look at even when they're battling, like even Yondu, in that scene about when they're trying to escape jail, it wasn't really about escaping jail, right? You find out about Yondu, like, you know, the whole thing is that he's been abandoned by the Ravagers. Why? Because he was trafficking children. And then you sort of find out what was the whole point of why did he keep Peter on board? So every single scene had an emotional through line. It wasn't just about some sort of one physical goal or just showing a cool battle scene. So I think that's one of the key things to remember. It had a payoff, at the end.
Payoff. If you have a setup, you want to have a payoff. It was kind of a reward or a reveal for the audience as to why, discover why we're watching this.
Tell me something I don't know already.
Do that. Yeah, you can't do that constantly. We can't be confused as to why something's happening.
Right.
But we generally should know, and then we should there should be a little reveal that really brings it all together, which is what you're saying. And they had a lot of well-crafted scenes, so it did work in that respect.
Yep.
Okay, so my number 9 is go big with set pieces, but small and intimate with character scenes. So with the $200 million budget and all the CGI they can get, they had really cool action scenes, amazing battles and everything. And just the visuals of the landscapes and the vistas and the planets were great. But you need to balance that with those small character scenes. And there were a lot of just one-on-one dialogue scenes. Now, there may have been a little bit too much of the talking heads dialogue back and forth. I think those could have been trimmed a little bit. But in general, I think those really rewarded the audience because we love these characters. We spent a lot of time with them in the previous movie, and we want to see them open up a little bit, learn some new things about these characters. So little scenes like Drax with Mantis when he kept saying that she was ugly, that could have just been a throwaway thing, a 30-second scene, but they let it breathe, and it turned out to be a really good scene,
Right. Yeah. Completely agree with you on that. It's like you said before, James Gunn has a great way of balancing tone. If it was in any other movie, people are like, okay, I know action movies need a rest, basically, because if you keep having action, audience become numb to it. And again, it could be also because we're already prepared by knowing the overall arc of this movie or overall theme of this movie is about family. So the intimate, smaller scenes are more accepted by the audience. So yeah, again, yeah.
Even if that's not conscious, it feels like it belongs, the scenes belong.
Exactly. Yep.
Totally agree. Okay. So how about number 10? What do you got?
Number 10 is, every screenwriter, let's just say every storyteller tries to create the most memorable characters, like either, someone with a, crazy characteristic or feature, or something like that. And it's usually for screenwriting, it's basically we tell people, try to find your character's voice or character's voices. And I'd say for Guardians of the Galaxy, they literally found their voices through their voice. If you notice every single piece of dialogue, the way Drax talks, the way Star-Lord talks, the way Rocket Raccoon talks, they all have their own ways of insulting people. Drax is very blunt, very, very much not understanding, social interactions. He just says things that are on his mind. Star-Lord always uses 80s references, so it sort of tells us about his character that, he's stuck in that childhood. Like either it's the growth is stunted because that's when he lost his mother in a way, or it's just because Earth is so memorable for him. Rocket, that guy, he loves being in sort of an a-hole, loves insulting people, so that comes through in his dialogue. And then, like you mentioned before, we started that Gamora has this really hard perceived shell over her, and that's usually her dialogue too. She's always talking about beating people up, or in the first movie, more so in the first movie, don't touch me, if you touch me, you'll lose that hand or something like that. And then that sort of dialogue of her being tough is validated when, in actuality, when Nebula revealed that fight scene reveals their childhood, is that maybe Gamora had this wall up all the way since the beginning. And then at the end, you see Gamora sort of, in a way, we thought Nebula arced, right? But in a way, I felt like Gamora arc because if you notice at the very end of the scene, she actually hugged Nebula, putting their rivalries behind them, which to me felt like it's more like Gamora removing her hard exterior and saying, I agree, I should not be so adversarial. I should not see everything as a challenge. This is something that I've been doing since I was a child. So, yeah.
Yeah. She's always trying to be tough. Sometimes she is tough.
Yep.
But she's always trying to put up this wall, and that showed also in the romantic through line with Peter, which still is kind of a will they or won't they thing, which I think works good. Because if they did get together, maybe it wouldn't be as interesting. I don't know. At this point, I mean, I think
it's too cliched if they got them together like that.
But it's, I mean, at this point, there's kind of nowhere else really to go if they're going there, you know. So maybe in part 3 they're together, but they're driving each other crazy, you know. But yeah, and it's because he understood his characters and their voices were defined because he had defined their characteristics. In my story map method, I have what you call the basic story map, which defines all the main dramatic elements in your screenplay. So for your protagonist, for example, you define their external goal, their internal goal, their skill, their misbehavior, and their Achilles heel or flaw, you know, major flaw. So once you know those things, you can write really effective dialogue and explore your theme, which you've defined as well. And he's done that, you know, in this film. It's not perfect, obviously. It's not my absolute favorite Marvel film, but I think it really worked really well on it, and it opened huge. And I think it's definitely going to be ranked up there with the MCU films.
Yep.
And it's a crowd pleaser.
So any box office predictions? You know, like billions? How many do you think it's going to break at?
Well,
1.2 billion.
You know, it's funny because the first one made over 300 million, which is kind of like a threshold for like monster blockbuster these days.
Right.
And you have the 8th Fast and the Furious movie, which might not break 300, which is interesting.
Right.
Because the previous one, I think, was over 400. And this one, I don't know if it'll break 300. We'll see. But it opened huge to 145 million, which is still, and that was a lot bigger than the previous one. But will it have as many legs? I don't know. What do you think?
I'm feeling, I usually go by worldwide, but I know you're going by domestic, but worldwide, I think it could easily, I think, break at least 1.1 billion. I'm being ambitious with my prediction. One of the reasons being is that I think the first one barely broke a billion. It was like 800 million, right, worldwide. I think the first one.
I think it was in that.
Thing was, this one upped everything that everybody loved from the first one, and on top of that, the first one, other than comic book fans, like maybe just the audience, the regular layperson, went in not knowing what they were watching. They just thought, oh, it's a cool space movie with these characters. In a way, now they have like a huge fan following. So, and I think that with enough of these jokes and these gimmicks, I think gimmick is too harsh of a word, but I think these great scenes of these characters and these hilarious scenes, I think there are just some things that people would there's repetitive viewing quality to Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Especially, I know this movie also sort of caters to my immature side. Like I found myself like laughing. I was like laughing out loud, and basically I couldn't stop laughing 5 minutes after when Drax was talking about his famously huge turds. So that part, I couldn't stop laughing at that. That to me was hilarious. And I think the other scene that really like got me laughing was the very end scene, the post-credit scene where, for anybody out there, this is like, it's a spoiler alert, but I guess if they listen to this far, then they don't mind spoilers. But Teenage Groot, I think Teenage Groot was just absolutely hilarious. Like the way he just played up the stereotype of the angsty teenager and acting all moody. So it was really hilarious. And then Star-Lord now, in a way, again, it ties back to the emotional through line. Now Star-Lord's the dad, right? So in a way, he's playing Yondu's part now.
Yeah, and I think he says as much. Like now he understands.
Yeah.
But the other thing is we shouldn't discount. He definitely shot it for 3D. I didn't even see it in 3D, but I could tell it was designed to be like really in your face, outrageous 3D.
Yeah.
And that's something that kids love, and that of course your tickets cost more, so then it makes more money when you have 3D. So that's definitely a huge thing. Okay, why don't we wrap up? You can find out more about me on act4screenplays.com. You can go to Amazon and check out one of my books, like How to Write a Great Screenplay and Story Maps TV Drama. And you can find out more about Steve and read his articles at bamsmackpow.com, which is one of the top superhero sites. It's dedicated to all things comic book. So until the next Story Map Screenwriting Podcast, thanks for joining us. Steve, thanks again for joining me.
Awesome. Thank you, Dan. It's always fun talking about the latest MCU offerings. It's always a pleasure.
What's coming up? What's next? Thor Ragnarok?
Thor Ragnarok, and venturing to the other side of sort of Marvel's rivalry, Wonder Woman. So that's coming out too. So it'll be interesting to see how they develop their solo movie. Yeah. So.
Yeah, we have the competing, the DCEU versus the MCU, which is still going on and probably will go on for the rest of our lives.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. All right. Well, I will talk to you soon.
Excellent.
I want my $2.